through primarily DMT.
Also, a shaman would come and say, well, it really also has to do with the spirit of the plant. And so if you have a chemical that is synthesized, it would still be very similar to a chemical found in a plant, and the plant spirit might have the aegis over that use of that. Whether it came from a plant or not, it would still be the molecule that would be recognized. Or, you might say something like that in terms of the devas that govern certain activities. I know that in looking at the literature of the ayahuasca use, and I even had a wonderful experience when someone just played the song that the ayahuasca shamans use.
That's like the songs, aren't they?
Just the songs alone gave me the experience. I didn't need the plant.
Right.
So, that would be explained by, the spirit of the plant or the spirit of the shaman is carried along by those energetic waves.
I think so.
So, it's just a very whole interesting realm here with many different elements to it. And it's fascinating to look at one element, but then also to contemplate what it would look like with all of these other elements added, and which is what the spiritual practices are, and what happens when someone practices a certain meditation or a certain chanting or whatever. Could that be stimulating DMT and similar molecules in our own body, which is why we have those mystical experiences associated with those practices?
Well, I think so, sure. Any experience in the mind obviously has got a correlate in the brain. It might not be cause and effect. We could really spend a lot of time about the cause versus the effect sort of discussion, but
so
still,
that's a chicken and egg question.
The chicken and egg. But I think it's unarguable that there are these correlates of conscious experience in the brain, and if the changes in the brain occur first, and the consciousness then kind of follows thereafter, or if the effect on consciousness then kind of results in the release of these chemicals in sort of a cascading form is a hard question to answer, but there are clearly correlates, and probably some kind of biological underpinning, as it were. I don't know if I would actually call it causal, but at least an underpinning.
Well, when you looked at when scientists have looked at the near-death experience, and then they see, well, if you stimulate the right front lobe of the brain, you get going down the tunnel and seeing the bright light, and therefore it's just an hallucination. You could also counter and say, well, that's just the cascade sequence that's already programmed into our brain to allow access, and when you stimulate that through an episode in which you almost died, or profound dreams, which you can also have of that nature, or external stimulus, such as in the lab, then this is what's happening. It's also interesting that shamans report having to die before they find their powers or their way back. They have similar kinds of episodes. Who knows that it doesn't gear the body up for future experiences. All that works, but it's certainly intriguing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the whole issue of reproducing some of these experiences in a laboratory-controlled environment is a really intriguing one. In my book, I do describe in fair detail a scenario in which DMT is released at the time of death, and it would help kind of mediate the movement of consciousness out of the body as it's dying. And if that were true, and a number of our volunteers reported near-death experiences, and almost everybody reported a sense of their consciousness leaving the body. And if there were big amounts of DMT released at death, it opens up the possibility of a dry run of being able to practice the process of dying. If it's the same physiological sort of basis, if there's a lot of DMT around at the time of death, and if you could give a lot of DMT, to kind of mimic what they're going to be expecting later on when they are in the dying process, then it might provide some practice. It might allow people to negotiate or learn to negotiate those spaces with some familiarity, so when the time of death occurs, and if there is a lot of DMT released or similar compounds, then people will not be so surprised. They'll say, oh, right, this is familiar, and I will expect this and I'll expect that, and the best way is to let go into the experience and to open to it as best as possible, those sort of things.
And to really demonstrate that the soul continues after death. There is another realm to go to. This physical world isn't all that there is. Or at least add to that argument.
Well, it certainly seems as if there's a non-material inhabitant or a non-material kind of habitation of consciousness, which isn't dependent on the body. You know, and if it's, you know, the whole thing of what is life and what is death, I mean, the means by which I started to model or explain some of these out-of-body sort of non-material experiences was to start to think about some of the recent developments in cosmology around the condition of matter, which is called dark matter. There's apparently 98% of the mass of the universe is invisible, which means it either doesn't reflect light or generate light. That's 98% of the mass of the universe. And it's streaming through us at all times. It keeps our visible universe from flying apart. It kind of permeates and surrounds this universe. So it seems to me if there is the vast amount of mass of the universe invisible, it would seem that with just the pure numerical fact of its presence would imply that it has to be inhabited. There has to be intelligences within all of that invisible matter. So it might be that one of the things that happens with DMT and some of these other compounds is that it changes the receiving characteristics of consciousness and of the brain.
And expands our bandwidth.
It expands our bandwidth. We are able to perceive channels that we aren't normally able to perceive. And there certainly are a lot of other channels out there. If 90% of what's out there we aren't able to see in our normal state of consciousness.
So it really puts mysticism back on the map, doesn't it?
It sort of does. And it also, our studies kind of demonstrate a reliable way of, you know, transporting people there or kind of changing their capacity to receive certain bandwidth.
What's the future of this work? Can you imagine or devise a non-invasive way of testing when someone is expanded with the bandwidth? They could sit in your lab and do whatever spiritual practice, and you could, you know, see how far out they were going or in what direction. Can we, you know, have vehicles where we can go here or go there in consciousness rather than just leaving it up to a, you know, roll of the dice?
Yeah. Well, you know, those studies wouldn't be hard. I mean, it's pretty grueling work, let me tell you that. But and the kind of research that I could envision doing, I kind of spell out in one of the last chapters of the book, kind of what I would perceive as an ideal agenda and location for future research to take place.
What would that be?
Well, it wouldn't be in a hospital, and it wouldn't be purely biologically based, sort of treating people as large lab rats like I referred to earlier on. It would be to explore and help people with purely human functions and capabilities. So there would certainly be a lot of interest in some of the therapeutic work that you had alluded to that took place earlier on in the first wave of human psychedelic research. But I think it wouldn't purely be focused on psychopathology and making sick people better, but I think it would also be kind of geared towards the enhancement and expansion of normality as well. And I could think of a couple of areas where it wouldn't be a big stretch to conceive of just expanding current research thinking, which would involve studies into creativity, which is a very it's a very kind of hot topic in